Good morning. Am I supposed to be in that podium? I'm fine. Okay, great. It's good to be here with all of you this Sunday morning in August. My favorite places are green and filled with water, like that one, which is actually in Australia. No wilting plants, no dusty, lifeless soil, where the leaves are lush, green, and vibrant, and the soil is moist and dark brown. Not like my current garden, where the dirt is dusty, the fennel and parsley look dead. The fennel's not actually dead, by the way. And my tarragon, my precious tarragon, has burnt leaves. And weeds are impossible to pull. You need a jackhammer. But put me in a garden with a never-ending flow of water, with moss-covered rocks, small mint forests, proud green basil, and tall fern trees, and I'm in my happy place. That's where I feel restored, rejuvenated, and healed. So when Isaiah says in the passage that was just read that God will give you water so you will be like a well-watered garden, like an ever-flowing spring, then Isaiah's got my attention. I want to be like that. What promise could be better than this? There is an important condition, though. If, Isaiah says, if you free the oppressed, if you stop spreading vicious rumors, if you feed the hungry, if you help those in need, then you will be like a watered garden. We compassionate social justice types appreciate that condition. That seems good and right. And yet, there's something that doesn't feel quite right about this passage in Isaiah 58. Let's read it again, and this is a slightly different translation than the one that was just read. Remove the heavy yoke of oppression. That sounds right. Stop pointing your finger and spreading vicious rumors. That sounds right. Feed the hungry and help those in trouble. That sounds right. Then your light will shine out from the darkness, and the darkness around you will be bright as noon. Okay. The Lord will guide you continually, giving you water when you are dry, and restoring your strength. Not so sure. You will be like a well-watered garden. That sounds good. But again, not so sure. You will be like an ever-flowing spring. So in sum, do good to the poor, the oppressed, the needy, and so on, and God will make you thrive like a well-watered garden and give you water when you are dry. Yes, caring for the poor and so on is right. But is it really true that if you do those things, if you free the oppressed, if you help the poor, if you help the needy, then God will help you thrive and will give you what you need and will guide you continually? We know how unkind history can be to saints and heroes. We know that many activists suffer from burnout, activists working on behalf of the poor. And for some of us, an evening standing up serving meals to the homeless would likely result in our achy bones feeling like a parched desert. This kind of promise that God will make us like a well-watered garden if we feed the poor and so on has the potential to set us up for feeling disillusioned or disappointed or discouraged. Because life doesn't always work out that way, that you will feel like a well-watered garden when you do the right thing. People can do the right thing their whole lives and get stricken with great pain and suffering. Just ask Job. It doesn't appear that he felt like a well-watered garden. And one can give sermons about caring for the poor, feeding the oppressed, and so on, and yet feel like one's body is racked with pain. It always irks me when people make promises in TV and movies, books too, but I don't see it in books as much. But in TVs and movies, when they promise someone else that they won't let anything happen to them. I promise that I'll take care of you. I promise it's going to work out. I promise you that I'll protect you. I promise that you won't get hurt or you won't get killed. Again and again and again in our TV shows and movies. This even happens in one of my favorite TV shows, Doctor Who. Uh-oh. Doctor Who is a brilliant time and space traveler who is sometimes male and sometimes female. Watch the show to find out. Who often tells his or her companions that he or she will keep them safe and get them home, that he'll protect them. For example, this is one example, the doctor says to his companion, and to give you some context, this is on a desert planet, and they arrived there on a city bus through a portal. Sounds crazy. Well, that's Doctor Who. It's crazy like that. Watch it. But he says to his companion on this desert planet, because the planet out there with 3 suns, a wormhole, and alien sand, that planet is nothing. You hear me? Nothing compared to all those things waiting for you. Food, home, people, and well-watered gardens. Yes, I added that part. That's not in the script. Hold on to that because we're going to get there. I promise I'm going to get you home. The planet was dangerous, by the way, so keep that in mind. The promise to get you home, that's a serious promise to make given the circumstances. I roll my eyes every time the doctor makes promises like this because the doctor can't guarantee them. He can't guarantee that he's going to get them home, and the doctor ought to know that after living for hundreds of years. The doctor's promises seem like what Mary Poppins calls pie crust promises, easily made, easily broken. So do Isaiah's promises about God making his listeners like well-watered gardens if they get their priorities right, are those empty promises? So what can we make of this passage of Isaiah that seems so right in its call for us to care for the poor and yet so wrong in making a promise that our experience of life suggests can't always be guaranteed? In this passage, it seems that Isaiah is drawing from a tradition that you find in the Old Testament where if you do the right thing, then you will be rewarded. Usually it's speaking to the nation of Israel. If you do the right thing, you're going to be rewarded. If not, you're going to be harmed. This is a tradition that you see frequently. And I think this is a tradition that we have learned is not a tradition in the Bible that is correct. Sometimes the Bible gets things wrong in light of what we later learn about God. I think this is one of those times. I don't know this for sure. I've always wondered, well, what do these promises mean to the original audience? And I can't get a clear answer on that. But at this point, the best I can say is, well, this is an area where we have to disagree with what it actually says because of what we know about God elsewhere in the Bible. But even if I don't think it's correct to read these or to take these as being literal promises that we can count on, I think there's still truth to these promises. And I think the truth is that if we do free the oppressed, if we do help the poor, if we do help the needy, if we do speak truthfully and respectfully about the vulnerable, then these things do better help us to receive and hear from God. They shape us to become more receptive to God's love and grace. They guarantee nothing, but they greatly increase the chances of something. It's like how doctors tell us that we should exercise and eat well if we want to live longer and better. Walk the treadmill, eat your kale. I like that part because I like kale. Don't eat that hamburger, don't eat that ice cream, and you'll still be running in your 90s. We all know that that's not literally true. We all know that if we do all of those right things, if we're really fit, that we could still die in a car crash, we could still get cancer, we could still get dementia before we're in our 90s. But it's also still true, even though that's true, it's also still true that doing those things increases your chances of living well into your 90s. But just don't count on it. Helping out the poor and vulnerable is like opening the spigot and allowing God's ever-flowing fountain of love flow through us. That love and grace is always flowing. But sometimes we need to take action if we want that water to flow through us. And even when we take that action and we do the things that Isaiah calls people to do, there could always still be something else, something that gets in the way, something beyond our control that gets in the way of being able to thrive like a well-watered garden. Something that's clogging up the spigot, or maybe even the soil that the water is flowing into doesn't have the right nutrients. This idea that the promise isn't guaranteed and that we may not feel like a well-watered garden after we do these good things, I think is actually good news. And the reason for that is because it means that when we don't feel like a well-watered garden, we don't have to blame God or ourselves if we're not thriving like a well-watered garden. Something else is getting in the way. Most, if not all of us, though, probably can't free the oppressed. We're not personally binding the oppressed in some way, not directly anyway. And with our conflicting demands and energies, there's only so much we can do to help the poor, and it's so complicated to even figure out the best way to do that. Life is already very overwhelming for some of us, even some of us who are well off. We can give donations here and there to respectable charities, and that's one way we can try to do this. But we can't by ourselves change complex systems that benefit the rich at the expense of the poor. One of the things in Isaiah's list that we can control more directly is how we speak about the marginalized and the vulnerable. Isaiah says to stop spreading vicious rumors, to stop pointing fingers. We can try to speak truthfully and respectfully about the marginalized and the vulnerable. And I think if we change our language and how we speak about the needy, the poor, the marginalized, and the vulnerable, that can help us better hear and receive God's grace. For example, referring to immigrants or migrants as animals or infestations, or spreading false rumors about immigrants that they are eating our cats and dogs. These things, I think, impede us from being able to hear from God. And we can deliberately choose to not say these things about the vulnerable, and we can choose to be very careful about what kind of stories we spread about other groups of people to make sure that these stories are true. And also, I think an action we can do is to turn off news channels that use this kind of language about the poor and vulnerable, or that leave false rumors unchecked and let them spread around, or even worse, actually promote them. But I think most of us here are probably already careful about these things. We are already careful about the language that we use, and we're already careful about the news that we watch. So even this may not be much of a challenge for our group here. But I think we make a mistake when we think that Isaiah 58, to begin with, is primarily addressed to us. It is in some ways, but I think it's primarily addressed to the wealthy and the powerful of his time. In particular, I think that it is addressed to the leaders and the movers and shakers of the community that he's speaking to, primarily addressed to them. The ones who can actually make a big difference for the poor, the marginalized, the oppressed, and the vulnerable, the movers and shakers. Isaiah 58 is about people, the audience, who are trying to get God's attention to help them by doing good religious things like fasting. The passage that immediately precedes the one that was read is about fasting. These people are fasting. They need God's help. They just got back from an exile in Babylon. They're trying to rebuild the city of Jerusalem and its temple and its walls. It's slow going. There's a lot of quarreling. There's a lot of economic hardship. They're fasting so that God will listen to them and help them. They are saying, look, God, we need some help. We're going through the ritual of fasting, the good ritual of fasting, to get that help from you. Or as one commentator says on this passage, this sort of self-interested worship amounts to hugging God and hoping for a cookie. The hugging of God is the fasting. The cookie would be to get help with rebuilding the city. And I think those who are doing the fasting in this passage are primarily the well-off. The poor are too famished to have the luxury of fasting. And it's also interesting that in this passage, in the Hebrew, when it says, if you help the poor, then you will be like a well-watered garden, the you there is in the Hebrew is actually singular. Knowing the Bible as I know, I would have expected that you to be plural, because in the Bible it often is referring to a group of people rather than to individuals. But in this case, it seems to be referring to individual powerful people. And that just seems to be to these individual powerful people in the community. If you take care of the poor, then you will thrive. You yourself take care of the poor, then you yourself will thrive. And so I like to think that it would be similar to if Isaiah wrote a letter today to particular individual powerful people. So for example, if Isaiah wrote a letter to House Speaker Mike Johnson and Senior White House Faith Advisor Paula White-Cain, and maybe others who have power who believe in God. I'm not sure who all they are, but I suspect it's a lot of them. And the letter might go something like this. And I think this would be in the spirit of what Isaiah is doing. Dear Speaker Johnson and Advisor White-Cain, God is less interested in your worship services and your thoughts and prayers. Not that those are bad, but that's not what God mostly cares about. And God is definitely not interested in your prattling pietistic platitudes. These aren't going to get God's attention. Instead, God wants to know what you're doing for the oppressed, the poor, and the vulnerable. How are you fixing places where the system is rigged to benefit the rich at the expense of the poor? How are you preventing the rich from taking advantage of the vulnerable? What are you doing for the Palestinians in Gaza now that your ally Israel has used some of your country's weapons and money to decimate their lives? What are you doing for those who are starving and struggling in Central America, partly due to the past actions and maybe even present actions of your country? What are you doing to help house the homeless? Are you speaking about immigrants with respect and dignity? Are you telling the truth about the marginalized? Are you spreading false lies and rumors about them? Prioritize lifting up the poor, the weak, and the vulnerable. Make that your aim, your personal aim. Don't focus on making yourself rich. Focus on enriching the poor. If you do that, you will be rejuvenated and you will be like a well-watered garden, and I will give you what you need. I think that's the kind of thing that Isaiah might do today. Isaiah's example does seem to suggest that appealing to the powerful person's belief in God and their enlightened self-interest will help get them to help the poor. It seems to be trying to shake up these leaders, to motivate them to do the right thing by appealing to their desire to thrive. This does also seem to be like appealing to a sort of self-interested service that amounts to hugging God and hoping for a cookie. In this case, hugging God, rather than being fasting, it would be helping the poor, which is a much better way of hugging God. But it seems to be motivating them by promising them a cookie, that they're going to thrive and be well if they do this. And maybe offering cookies is sometimes what it takes to get the powerful to move in the right direction. Maybe. But the rich and powerful may also know that doing the right thing could cause them to lose their jobs and their friends, and it maybe even could cause them to get death threats. We and they know that there are certain times and places where that is, in fact, a real possibility. Still, so far from a well-watered garden, actually your life is potentially becoming a living hell as a result of making these right decisions. Still, it's also true that the only chance for them to truly become like a well-watered garden is to work toward freeing the oppressed, enriching the poor, and speaking respectfully and truthfully about the marginalized. That's one lesson of Isaiah 58, that these are God's priorities. This is how the rich and the powerful can get God's attention, is by prioritizing the poor, the vulnerable, and the marginalized. I think that's one lesson of Isaiah 58, a lesson that's primarily for the rich and the powerful, though to some degree also for us, who many of us are among the well-off. But there's another lesson that I think is easy to miss when we look at this passage. We're inclined to think of ourselves as Isaiah's audience, and that's true to some degree. But I think another way to learn from this passage is to identify not with the audience, but with Isaiah himself. We are not the movers and shakers that make up Isaiah's audience, but we can be the prophets who speak truth to power. We can be modern-day Isaiahs. I think Isaiah's example teaches us to boldly and bravely tell the rich and powerful to free the oppressed, enrich the poor, and humanize the marginalized. And we've recently witnessed something like this. We've witnessed a modern-day Isaiah who has done just that. On January 21st of this year, 1,000 or so people gathered at Washington, D.C.'s National Cathedral for the inaugural prayer service. The new president, the new vice president, and their families sat in the front row. The Right Reverend and Episcopal Bishop Marianne Budde gave the sermon. During it, she looked directly at Trump and said, "Let me make one final plea, Mr. President. Millions have put their trust in you. And as you told the nation yesterday, you have felt the providential hand of a loving God. In the name of our God, I ask you to have mercy upon the people in our country who are scared now. There are gay, lesbian, and transgender children in Democratic, Republican, and independent families, some who fear for their lives, and I can attest that that is literally true for some." She continues, "The people who pick our crops and clean our offices, our office buildings, they may not be citizens or have the proper documentation, but the vast majority of immigrants are not criminals. They pay taxes and are good neighbors. I ask you to have mercy, Mr. President, on those in our communities whose children fear that their parents will be taken away, and that you help those who are fleeing war zones and persecution in their own lands to find compassion and welcome here. Our God teaches us that we are to be merciful to the stranger, for we were all once strangers in this land." In saying this, Marianne Budde was a true prophet. Though she used gentler and softer words than the prophets often use, and even than Jesus uses sometimes, as we saw in the other passage read this morning where Jesus refers to others as hypocrites, you hypocrites. Her words were a lot gentler and softer than that. But I think she was a good example of being a modern-day prophet when she looked into the eye of the most powerful person on earth and asked him to care for the poor and the marginalized. Few will ever have the opportunity to be in the position that she was in. But there are other ways that we can follow Isaiah's example in being modern prophets when we have a well-grounded, high level of confidence about some wrong that is being done towards the poor, the vulnerable, and the oppressed. We can protest in front of government or corporate buildings. We can write letters to our representatives. We can challenge politicians at town hall meetings. We can vote against candidates who prioritize enriching themselves and to speak about the poor and marginalized in derogatory and demeaning ways. We can write letters to the editor, hoping that some of our leaders will see them. We can support movements like the civil rights movement of the 1960s that are more likely to get the attention of the rich and powerful. We can help out various organizations and denominations to draft statements that are more likely to make it to the press and be noticed by the rich and powerful, like the Mennonite Church USA's statement that calls for a ceasefire in the Israel-Hamas war. There are many ways for us to be Isaiah's today, perhaps some we have not even yet imagined. I think the image of the well-watered garden can apply to Isaiah and modern prophets too. Challenging the rich and the powerful also loosens the spigot to help prophets also become like well-watered gardens sometimes. I literally can feel myself becoming like a well-watered garden when I speak up and when I see others speaking up too. I hope Bishop Buddy felt like a well-watered garden after she spoke to the president. I know that just knowing that she spoke up increased that flowing water in me. Staying silent, and even worse, not seeing others speak truth to power, closes the spigot, and I can see that in myself. I hope that my words have helped a little, even a little, to open the tap that lets the divine fountain flow into the gardens of us all. Speaking of which, I think it's time to water my garden.
Well, Zoomers, once again, we have a wonderful chance